Away we go. So it's Valentine's Day. Did you notice? I don't know. Are we doing anything for Valentine's Day? If you didn't notice, always assume that your partner did, even if you didn't. If you have a partner or a close family member, always assume that even if you didn't, oh, Valentine's no big deal. Don't assume that your perspective is the only perspective there is. This will save you a lot of trouble. And gosh, that's a main point of our sermon today. Don't assume that your perspective is the only perspective that there is. So I wanted to give you, for Valentine's Day, talk on some of the most powerful techniques of communication and relationship that I can offer you. So let's dive right in. Today, we'll talk about rapport. The root word of communication is to commune. Did you ever notice this? The root word of communication is to commune, and the root words of commune are union, and it's actually a double, like, redundant Latin word, because cum means to come together, and un means to come together in union, right? So when we communicate, the whole idea is that we are coming together as a union. So what I want to say to you today is that if we don't reach rapport in our communication, we cannot even say that we've communicated. We've merely monologued in close proximity to one another. Have you ever had this experience of a proximal monologuing? Ooh, that sounds technical. I should write a thesis about proximal monologuing in the modern age. So if we don't reach rapport, right, there's all kinds of ways that we can talk at each other and never reach rapport, but you can't really call that, by definition, communication unless you reach some kind of unity. Ooh, wild. So that's our subject for today. Let's see if these notes say anything good. True rapport allows for closer connection in loving relationships, achieving mutuality in neutral relationships, and wise discernment in difficult relationships. So regardless of whether the relationship is already loving, you need rapport. If it's just, with a barista who asked you, the question of the day, would you rather be right or happy? You need rapport there in these kind of neutral relationships. And we, especially if we want to be discerning and wise, we actually need rapport in difficult relationships, with relationships that we differ with greatly, deeply. So this is not maybe how we always think about it, but we need rapport in all kinds of relationships. Okay, we all want love, don't we? I really love that song. Perhaps all you need is love, like the theme song of the day said. But we can definitely say we all want love. And it's really easy to say that we all want to be loved, right? That one's not hard. It's even not too hard to notice that we all want to love. These are both human needs in ourselves. We want to get love, and we're built to give love. We thrive, we're optimized as humans if we are giving love as well as receiving it. So a lot of us long for that. That's still not too hard. The hard one can be what Einstein called those ever-widening circles of compassion, widening our circles of compassion. So we long to get love, we long to give love, and if you're someone like a Unitarian Universalist with all of these principles of, expanding justice and free and responsible searches, and then we also need to be widening our embrace of compassion. That one can be a little harder. So we're going to work the science of love in all these directions today. Even when we're not trying to expand our compassion beyond the comfort zone, that very difficult challenge, maintaining rapport, closeness, and openness can be extremely difficult, even in our dearest relationships. Perhaps it's even hardest in our most intimate relationships, because those are with the people who know exactly how to push our buttons. We must grow our capacity for empathy, else we're likely to be cursed by a life filled with milquetoast acquaintances. With no deep love, no turning enemies into friends, like the quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln, I destroy my enemies when I turn them into my friends. Without the advanced skill of rapport building, nothing but the most superficial relationships are even possible. Our hearts will not settle for merely superficial relationships in our lives. We don't thrive without the depths. Our world as well won't survive without the ability to cross those borders with our hearts open. We could, some of us can stay in our boundaries with our hearts open, and some of us can cross borders with our hearts closed, but it's quite a rare thing to be able to cross borders with an open heart. This is all the prelude to my main point here. I hope you like the pep talk, though. Why rapport is a great idea. So, side note, crossing boundaries without rapport is sometimes necessary. As we heard in our interpersonal sharing, sometimes if, let's see, what do I say in my notes here that keep me from talking even if I get stage fright? When we're making laws to regulate the behavior of those who currently lack empathy or awareness, we may need, even if we can't get our heart open, we may need to step outside of our comfort zone with our heart temporarily closed and make a law with a frowny, mean face that can't quite understand the other person's perspective. If we need to actively stop harm, oppression, or marginalization in the moment, the ideal might be, I'd never move until my heart is filled with altruistic compassion like His Holiness the Dalai Lama or something like that. But sometimes you just need to take yourself to court with your frowny little face, make rules to protect someone, and open your heart later. This is also a way of acting with an open heart. But we should not convince ourselves that this creates real change. We're just as likely to polarize and entrench our enemies if we do not also eventually do the work of creating mutual understanding and the capacity to communicate with that union right in the middle there. That zones our discussion out to quite a political and global angle, but today I really want to focus on our Valentines. And it's easy to see some of us have had marriages or long-term dating experiences or relationships with a son-in-law or something like that, where this has happened. We've had to make rules, we've had to make boundaries, and yet the entrenched polarization, the entrenched frozen-heartedness continues under the surface for years and years and years. Wouldn't it be great if we could avoid those situations in the first place? Or if they happened, we could find a way to melt our frozen-heartedness back into the capacity for rapport and to see together. Fortunately, there is a path toward this. It's the path of emotional intelligence and maturity. It has been said that emotional maturity consists of the capacity to take more and more perspectives. We know what it's like to be emotionally immature. And actually, that doesn't mean an insult, right? This comes from Piaget's work. This comes from Kohlberg's work. These great developmental psychologists who said, when you are a baby, you can't take other perspectives. They do the test where like you're in the room with a 2-year-old, they hide the cookie in the drawer, and then leave the room and they send in another person. The 2-year-old assumes that they know the cookie's in the drawer because they saw it. They don't have that theory of mind that someone's perceiving a world that's different than theirs yet, right? So that's not too insult. You 2-year-olds, you're all so emotionally immature. No, let's not be ageist against 2-year-olds, you guys. But if the 2-year-old inside of us is still a little too strong, then we too can lack this ability. What we know is true. We can't put ourselves in the shoes of why the other person can't see it so. Why they can't see that cookie is hidden. And the cookie is a metaphor. You fill in the blanks of what that hidden cookie might be. Okay. So emotional maturity means to take more and more perspectives. If you grow up a little bit, maybe you can understand not just your view, but the view of your family members or members of your tribe. And if you grow up a little bit more, maybe you can even understand the view of other tribes. And if you grow up even a little bit more, maybe you become a religious pluralist or something. You don't only think that your own spirituality is the way to be. There might be all sorts of ways to come at it. These are signs of emotional maturity, that we can actually take on the perspectives of others and see together. It doesn't mean that we necessarily condone other people's perspectives. It doesn't necessarily mean that all perspectives are equal in a boring, harmful flatland that we've come to inhabit. It just means that we've shaken ourselves out of the rigidity of assuming that because I see it a certain way, everyone else should be able to see it that way. And if they don't, they must be crazy. Emotional maturity is an ever-widening circle of perspectives. What gets in the way of this is that we're built to constantly place the greatest priority in relating on our own perspective. Have you noticed this? Let me check for rapport here. It's a sermon on rapport. I better look and see if anybody's nodding or giving me a thumbs up, heart. Can you, you can't do them at the same time, I don't think. Yeah, so, we come in and there's so many tropes about this, right? Oh, we're not in a conversation to listen. We're just waiting our turn to speak. It's a trope for a reason. That's a trope for a reason. We're wired to just wait our turn to make our point. And if we learned to get really curious about the other perspective, this is a magic key that can actually unlock a significant quantity of the problems we experience in our relationships. Okay, so this bias, this my side bias that we're all built with, can give rise to a unique type of relational cognitive dissonance, or as your spouse will call it, stubbornness. Okay, you don't have to relational cognitive dissonance and proximal monologues. They're going to call it stubbornness. That's how you'll know you're doing it. Okay, code word stubbornness. Here we also have how I want to use that contemplation on, would you rather be right or happy? Where that contemplation really works, I believe, is when we recognize that the need to be right is the need to stay entrenched in our own perspective to the exclusion of what another is sharing. To allow that bias, that what I think and how I see it is the most important, is the way it is. They couldn't possibly be seeing it any other way. And so if they're not agreeing with me, they must be just being a jerk. If we can soften that innate bias of our being, the Buddhists call it self-grasping, innate, like we think this thing is the most important. We centralize this perspective above all others. If we can soften that need to be right, we can actually be quite a bit more happy, because happiness in relationship comes from that rapport, that connection, true communication, which is a communion. I think this expression helps point to a phenomenon where you can be correct and you can still hurt, alienate, or grow more distant from a loved one. Last week we talked about, like the joy of being wrong. We did a contemplation, when were you wrong and you found out, and gosh, what a relief that I was wrong. Well, now think about a time when you were right and you still ruined the relationship for a week, a month, or the rest of your life. So this little bias in our mind says, like, if I'm right, that's the most important. And it's like our little egos think that somehow being right fixes everything else. Like the righteousness of our cause should create happiness and harmony and collaboration. And I think we've been around on planet Earth long enough to recognize that that's not the case. That's a dangerous form of solipsism, actually. This assumption that you are the center of the universe and that your righteousness, like the ancient kings, flows out in every direction, harmonizing the land. Alas, that's not the kind of crown you get to wear. Okay, so prologue's almost over. We're about to get to the meat. Here we go. We need to, but the meat is shorter. Don't worry about the time. I'm watching the clock, you guys. We need a way to short circuit this aspect of our brain that assumes my way is true right from the outset. We don't need to short circuit being correct or valuing truth, right? We in a UU fellowship value the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. But perhaps an element of the responsibility means that instead of charging forward to our truth, onward you soldiers, marching off to truth, instead of charging forward, perhaps responsibility is the ability to respond to others while we're searching for truth and meaning. Okay, without becoming so open-minded that our brains fall out, can we become so open-hearted that we truly hear what another is expressing rather than just waiting for our turn to rebut them? I won't tell you the meaning that the motivational speakers say about assume, but you make something out of you and me. But I will say perhaps that when you're waiting to rebut, you're being a butt. Okay, the cute little things you can remember. So I want to share today a single method with you. It's got 3 parts though, to make it interesting. A method that you can implement immediately, and that technique is simple. It is empathetic curiosity. Empathetic curiosity. When we get curious, we can learn to do that instead of jumping immediately to criticism, and this can allow us to make the type of space it takes to truly hear someone. So if you are, I know some of you are Olympic athletes in the discipline of jumping to conclusions. Anybody win the gold medal or the silver? Sometimes a few bronzers out here, I see you. We're also going to end our career in jumping immediately to criticism, and we are going to learn to sprint toward curiosity as swiftly as possible. All right, 3-part method. Here we go. You survived the prelude. Let's get to the tofu, the meat of this conversation. Here we go. I've collected 3 aspects to this method of curiosity that I've picked up. These are all picked up lately from 3 different spiritual teachers that I watch all these lectures, and I'm a clergyman. Is that still a word? I'm a clergyman, and so I'm constantly just steeping myself in wisdom traditions if I can find them. And I picked out these 3 different slogans from 3 different sources that are going to make up aspects of our technique today. The first one is called, for our version, the Sufi Principle, because the person I heard say it was a Sufi. So number 1, the Sufi Principle. Here it goes. I was watching this class on Zoom, and he's reading this from my perspective, this beautiful, beautiful thing from this Sufi teacher, Hazrat Inayat Khan. Now, the cool thing about Hazrat Inayat Khan, one of the cool things, is that he was alive back in the late 18 and early 1900s, right? And so when he writes about the spiritual man is like this, and he opens his heart to God, and when God feels his devotion, then God sends down his blessing into the heart of the spiritual man. Okay, do you hear the problem here? Right, a little bit challenging. But as I heard the Sufi, I learned to translate that out. I'm like, in my own mind, I'm like, okay, it was the early 1900s. Got it. I don't have a time machine to go back and erase misogyny yet. And so I'm just going to erase it in my brain. But somebody, of course, naturally brought up, the thing that the teacher's reading it. I experienced him as this totally open-hearted moment, and then somebody comments like, hey, I'm not sure that's even spiritual, or I don't remember what exact, I'm just characterizing them in my head, I'm sorry. And that's just the background. But what the teacher said was so cool. He said, number 1, he empathized with the person, which is great. That's like some expert empathy. He didn't just argue for his point. He said, I hear that. That is quite problematic and troubling. For today's practice, let's try to listen to what he may have intended rather than what our modern sensibilities would prefer. And it was super cool. I mean, there's certainly a time for retroactive analysis of entrenched misogyny in patriarchal cultures, right? Plenty of time for that. And he was trying to get the, I don't remember what the quote was, but it was this beautiful teaching, and it just happened to use all male pronouns. And you could miss out on the intent if you focused on the language. And so his advice was, what if we tried to listen for what he might have been intending, rather than solely look through the filter of how we hear it? And this is really cool. It actually goes, it's the opposite of extreme postmodern analysis. You may, if you've studied art or something like this, you may know extreme postmodern analysis is where they say the artist's intention is completely irrelevant. We don't care what Dave meant when he wrote that song. The only thing that matters is how you respond to it. In communication, though, if you want rapport, if you want to use your inbuilt human superpowers, that's not going to work. If you only focus on how you respond, you're going to be unaware that most of our responses are made of habituated triggers and inbuilt biases. We have to learn to listen, even if we don't speak the same language, even if we don't like the type of language. Is there an intent behind that language that we can start from? When we start there, we actually facilitate understanding that can allow us to have functional discussions rather than proximal monologues. So this is the Sufi principle. Oh, and then last but not least, let's see. Yes, if we react to our own reactions, we never get a chance to actually understand the other. But even if the other's intention was nefarious, it's better that we know that clearly rather than just responding to something that we made up. So we can get curious beyond what these terms, the language a person is using, bring up in me. What do I think they were trying to express? This is the Sufi principle, part 1. What do I think they were trying to express? Okay, number 2, the Tulku Principle, named so because I was listening to a talk by a Tibetan Tulku, and they said this. This is a Tulku whose English is pretty good, but he says, "My English is not so good. Please compassion me. My English is not so good. Please compassion me." And the slogan that I really loved is he kept saying this phrase, "Please try to hear not what I'm saying, but what I'm trying to say. Please try to hear not what I'm saying, but what I'm trying to say. Please compassion me." And so I wonder if, with your Valentine, let's not have to expand it out to, political adversaries or something like that, but your Valentine comes to you later and they've got, well, and the words they're using are triggering you, right? Or the way they're describing something makes no sense. Then think to yourself, please compassion me. And perhaps try to hear what they're trying to say and not just what they're saying. In a way, this sounds a lot like the last one, but it goes a little bit deeper. In the work of Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, he often says people are only saying 2 different things. People are only ever saying please or thank you. If we can hear beneath the accusations that come at us sometimes, the differing stories, the wildly oppositional strategies, and understand that people are just trying to express their universal human needs and the feelings that those needs inspire in us when they are met or unmet, we can hear what we're all actually trying to say underneath what we are saying, and we can compassion them. Okay, and then finally, the Llama Principle, called so because this came from a Tibetan Lama. And the Lama says his principle is we can meet from our sameness and learn from our differences. We can meet from our sameness and learn from our differences. And so I brought up this this 1900s use of excessive male pronouns. And I do want to be clear, it's great to criticize that, in my opinion. And if we don't start from trying to find where the person was coming from, we'll likely lose any chance of that rapport that means real communication is possible. When we want to learn from our differences, when we want to share our differences and help educate another, we have to meet first. We actually have to create a rapport. Otherwise, you can talk, 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 and nothing gets in. Have you ever experienced this with your Valentine? You talk, talk, talk. Why do they not seem to get what I'm saying? Well, the good news is you can start with you. They're talking, and likely not as much as getting in as they would wish for either. You can start with, instead of starting with criticism, we can sprint to communing, to rapport, and to curiosity. So we can meet from our samenesses, and this is the order it has to go. If you want to learn from your differences, we have to first find a way to meet from our samenesses. Okay. This could be in relationships. This could be just, there's a sameness in that you both want the relationship to work. Sometimes, like, oh God, I disagree with you. I really don't like you right now, but I know that we both want this relationship to work. That's a sameness you can meet on. Maybe you don't both want the relationship to work anymore, but you do want the kids to be happy. That's a sameness that you can meet on, and you can learn from the differences from that ground. If we learn to meet from our human heart, the fact that we all feel sad, mad, glad, scared, and confused sometimes, and we all need agency and connection, survival and self-transcendence, we can meet from the part that's the same in all of us, and from here we can learn from each other. We can see how the other came to see it that way, and even if we don't come to agree, we can generate rapport. The root of the word communication is to commune, and the root of that means union. If we cannot come to see together, we can't really say that we've communicated. We've merely monologued in another's presence. Rapport is the fundamental human nutrient that the USDA never put in your junior high school curriculum. We long to see and be seen clearly. When we prioritize our empathetic curiosity, we can listen deeper into the heart of the matter and even learn to speak a language that the other understands. The Sufi Principle. Perhaps let's hear what they were intending to speak rather than just listen to how that lands for us. The Tulku Principle. Please compassion me. Hear what I'm trying to say and not just what I'm saying. The Llama Principle. Learn from our samenesses and learn from our differences. This enables us to not only give the love we want, but eventually to get the love we want too, and even begin to expand our circles of compassion in an ever-widening embrace. Thank you for joining us this morning for our sermon. I hope I've given you a couple of great tools that you can use on your Valentine later today. Please compassion them. Hear what they're trying to say, not just what they're saying.